Good. Hello, boys and girls. Today we are going to continue our reading of The Tiger Rising, and we are on chapter 4 today. That is going to be on, looks like page 3 of your document. So again, if you can take out your book copy from your binder, if it is where it's supposed to be, we'll go ahead and get started with chapter 4. And you can see I have my little friend reading along with us today. So chapter 4, all right, so before we get started, today's reading is going to start the rising action. Chapters 1 through 3 would have been considered the exposition. So today's reading is going to be the start of the rising action. Don't fall. Okay. Sistine was in Rob's 6th grade homeroom class. Mrs. Soames made her stand up and introduce herself. My name, she said in her gravelly voice, is Sistine Bailey. She stood at the front of the room in her pink dress, and all the kids stared at her with open mouths as if she had just stepped off a spaceship from another planet. Rob looked down at his desk. He knew not to stare at her. He started working on the drawing of the tiger. What a lovely name, said Miss Soames. Thank you, said Sistine. Patrice Wilkins, who sat in front of Rob, snorted and then giggled and then covered her mouth. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Sistine said, home of the Liberty Bell, and I hate the South because the people in it are ignorant, and I'm not staying here in Lister. My father is coming to get me next week. She looked around the room defiantly. Well, said Miss Soames, thank you very much for introducing yourself, Sistine Bailey. You may take your seat before you put your foot in your mouth any further. The whole class laughed at that. Rob looked up just as Sistine sat down. She glared at him, and then she stuck her tongue out at him. Him. He shook his head, and he went back to his drawing. He sketched out the tiger, but what he really wanted to do was whittle it in wood. His mother had shown him how to whittle, how to take a piece of wood and make it come alive. She taught him when she was sick. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched her tiny white hands closely. Don't jiggle that bed, his father said. Your mama's in a lot of pain. He ain't hurting me, Robert, his mother said. Don't get all tired out with that wood, his father said. It's all right, his mother said. I'm just teaching Rob some things I know. But she said she didn't have to teach him much. His mother told him he already knew what to do. His hands knew. That's what she said. Rob, said the teacher, I need you to go to the principal's office. Rob didn't hear her. He was working on the tiger, trying to remember what his eyes looked like. Robert, Miss Soames said. Robert Horton. Robert looked up. Robert was his father's name. Robert was what his mother had called his father. Mr. Felmer wants to see you in his office. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, said Rob. And he got up and he took his picture of the tiger and he folded it up and he put it in the back pocket of his shorts. On his way out of the classroom, Jason Utmeyer tripped him and said, See you later, retard. And Sistine looked up at him with her tiny black eyes. She shot him a look of pure hate. Chapter 5. The principal's office was small and dark and smelled like pipe tobacco. The secretary looked up at Rob when he walked in. Go right on back, she said, nodding her big blonde head of hair. He's waiting for you. Rob, said Mr. Felmer when Rob stepped into his office. Yes, sir, said Rob. Have a seat, Mr. Felmer said, waving his hand at the orange plastic chair in front of his desk. Rob sat down. Mr. Felmer cleared his throat. He patted the piece of hair that was combed over his bald head, and he cleared his throat again. Rob, we're a bit worried, he finally said. Rob nodded. This was how Mr. Felmer began all of his talks with Rob. He was always worried that Rob did not interact with the other students, worried that he did not communicate, worried that he wasn't doing well in any way at school. It's about your legs. Yes, your legs. Have you been putting that medicine on them? Yes, sir, said Rob. He didn't look at Mr. Felmer. He stared instead at the paneled wall behind the principal's head. It was covered with an astonishing array of framed pieces of paper, certificates and diplomas and thank you letters. May I, look? Asked Mr. Felmer. He got up from his chair and he came halfway around his desk and he stared at Rob's legs. Well, sir, he said after a minute. He went back behind his desk and he sat down. He folded his hands together and he cracked his knuckles and he cleared his throat. Here's the situation, Rob. Some of the parents, and I won't mention any names, are worried that what you've got there might be contagious. Contagious means something that the other students could possibly catch. Mr. Felmer cleared his throat again, and he stared at Rob. Tell me the truth, son, he said. Have you been using that medicine you told me about, the stuff the doctor in Jacksonville gave you? Have you been putting that on? Yes, sir, said Rob. Well, said Mr. Felmer, let me tell you what I think. Let me be upfront and honest with you. I think it might be a good idea if we had you stay home for a few days. What we'll do is just give that old medicine more of a chance to kick in, let it start working its magic on you, and then we'll have you come back to school when your legs have cleared up. What do you think about that plan? Rob stared down at his legs. He felt the picture of the tiger burning in his pocket. He concentrated on keeping his heart from singing out loud with joy. Yes, sir, he said slowly. That will be all right. That's right, said Mr. Felmer. I thought you would think it's a good plan. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just write your your father, a note and tell him what's what. He can give me a call if he wants, and we can talk about it. Yes, sir, said Rob again. He kept his head down. He was afraid to look up. Mr. Felmer cleared his throat and scratched his head and adjusted his piece of hair, and then he started to write. When he was done, he handed the note to Rob. Rob took it, and when he was outside the principal's office, he folded the piece of paper up carefully and put it in his back pocket with the drawing of the tiger. And then, finally, he smiled. He smiled because he knew something Mr. Felmer did not know. He knew that his legs would never clear up. He was free. Okay, so boys and girls, that concludes chapter 4. So now you are going to go to your slide presentation and do your stop and jot activity or response for chapter 4. And then we'll continue reading chapter 5. We'll do our stop and jot, and then we'll do the same thing for chapter 6. Okay, guys, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.